When my phone rang at 2:47 a.m. after 5 years of complete silence, and I heard my son Michael's voice, my heart stopped beating for a moment. But instead of, "I'm sorry, Mom," or "I miss you," the first words that came out of his mouth were, "Is Dad's will still the same, or did you change it after our fight?" That's when I knew my biggest mistake wasn't cutting him off 5 years ago. It was putting his name in that will in the first place. My name is Sally Riggs, and I'm 62 years old. I live in a beautiful ranch-style home in Marietta, Georgia, about 30 minutes north of Atlanta. The house sits on 2 acres of perfectly manicured lawn that my late husband Frank used to tend every Saturday morning, riding his John Deere mower with the concentration of a surgeon. From my kitchen window, I can see the workshop where he taught our son Michael how to use power tools, how to read blueprints, how to build things that would last for generations. I used to think that workshop was where we built Michael's character. Now I know it was where I first started spoiling him. Frank and I spent 34 years building Riggs Construction, from a 2-man operation working out of our garage into one of Atlanta's most respected commercial construction companies. We built shopping centers, office complexes, and high-end residential developments across North Georgia. Our company employed 47 people at its peak, and we had contracts worth millions of dollars. Frank was the visionary, the man who could look at an empty lot and see a thriving business district. I was the organizer, the one who made sure permits were filed, payroll was met, and clients were happy. But most importantly, we were partners, in business, in marriage, in raising the son we both adored maybe a little too much. Michael was our only child, born when I was 34 and Frank was 36. We'd tried for years to have children, went through fertility treatments, suffered through 3 miscarriages that nearly broke us both. When Michael finally arrived, healthy and perfect and ours, we treated him like the miracle he was. Maybe that was our first mistake. Frank died 3 years ago of a massive heart attack while inspecting a job site in Buckhead. He was 59 years old, standing in the afternoon sun reviewing architectural plans with a client, when he just collapsed. The paramedics said he was probably dead before he hit the ground. No pain, no suffering, just there one moment and gone the next. I thought losing Frank was the worst thing that could happen to our family. I had no idea that Michael was about to prove me wrong. Frank left behind a meticulously planned estate worth approximately $4.7 million. The house, the business, investment properties, retirement accounts, life insurance, everything carefully structured to take care of me for the rest of my life and ensure that Michael would inherit a substantial legacy when I passed away. "Make sure our boy is taken care of," Frank had whispered to me in the hospital during his last moments of consciousness. "Promise me, Sally. Make sure Michael knows how much we loved him." I promised. God help me, I promised. The will was straightforward. I inherited everything during my lifetime, with the understanding that Michael would receive the bulk of the estate when I died. Frank had also set up a trust that would provide Michael with a modest monthly allowance until he turned 35, at which point he'd gain access to additional funds. It was designed to encourage responsibility while ensuring he'd never want for anything. We thought we were being generous. We thought we were being wise. We thought we were protecting our son's future. We had no idea we were funding his betrayal. The call came on a Tuesday night in late October. I'd been asleep for about 3 hours, deep in the dreamless sleep that comes with the prescription sleep aids I'd been taking since Frank died. The phone's shrill ring cut through the silence of my empty house like a fire alarm. I fumbled for the bedside lamp, squinting at the caller ID through eyes that weren't ready to focus. The display showed a number I didn't recognize, but underneath, in letters that made my heart slam against my ribs, was the name Michael. 5 years. 5 years since I'd heard his voice, 5 years since our catastrophic fight that ended with him storming out of this house, screaming that he never wanted to see me again. 5 years since he'd chosen his manipulative girlfriend Amber over the family that had given him everything. My hands were shaking as I answered the phone. "Michael?" I whispered, my voice rusty with sleep and surprise. "Hey, Mom." His voice was exactly the same, that casual, confident tone that used to make me smile when he called from college, when he called to tell me about his first job, when he called just to chat because he missed talking to his parents. For a split second, hope flared in my chest like a struck match. Maybe he was calling to apologize. Maybe he'd realized what he'd lost when he chose Amber over family. Maybe he'd heard about his father's death through mutual friends and wanted to grieve with the only other person who'd loved Frank as much as he had. "Michael, oh honey, I've missed you so much," I said, tears already starting to blur my vision. "I'm so glad you called. There's so much we need to talk about. So much has happened." "Yeah, about that," he interrupted, and something in his tone made my blood run cold. "I need to ask you something important. Dad's will, is it still the same as it was when you guys wrote it up, or did you change anything after our fight?" The words hit me like a physical blow. Not, "How are you?" Not, "I'm sorry for the things I said." Not, "I heard about Dad and I'm devastated." Not even, "Are you okay, Mom?" Just a question about money, about inheritance, about what he stood to gain from the deaths of the parents he'd abandoned. "What?" I managed to say, sure I'd misheard him. "The will, Mom. Dad's will. I know he left me a substantial inheritance, but I heard through the grapevine that you might have changed things after we had our falling out. I need to know if that's true." I sat up in bed, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. "Michael, your father died 3 years ago." Silence on the other end of the line. Not shocked silence, not grief-stricken silence, but the kind of silence that comes when someone is calculating their next move. "I know," he said finally. "I heard." "You heard?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You heard that your father died, and you didn't call? You didn't come to the funeral? You didn't think that maybe your mother might need her son during the worst time of her life?" "Look, Mom, I'm not calling to rehash the past. I'm calling because I need to know about my financial situation. Amber and I are planning for our future, and we need to know what kind of inheritance we're looking at." Amber. Of course this was about Amber, the woman who had poisoned my son against his family, who had convinced him that we were holding him back, who had filled his head with resentment and entitlement until he became someone I didn't recognize. "Your financial situation?" I said, my voice barely controlled. "Michael, do you understand what you're saying to me right now? I'm saying I have a right to know what my father left me. I'm saying that just because we had a disagreement doesn't mean I should be punished financially for the rest of my life." A disagreement. He called the destruction of our family, the theft from our company, the lies and manipulation and final explosive confrontation that ended with him screaming that he hated us both. He called all of that a disagreement. "Michael," I said slowly, trying to find some trace of the son I'd raised in the stranger's voice on the phone. "Your father's funeral was 3 years ago. I stood at his graveside and threw dirt on his coffin. And I looked around for you because even after everything that happened, I thought you'd come. I thought you'd want to say goodbye to the man who taught you to ride a bike and helped you with your homework and worked 16-hour days to build something he could leave to you." "That's very touching, Mom, but it doesn't answer my question." The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. This wasn't the boy who used to crawl into our bed during thunderstorms. This wasn't the teenager who cried when our old dog Max died. This wasn't the young man who used to call me every Sunday just to hear my voice. This was a stranger who shared my son's name and voice, but who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle between him and money. "Why are you calling me at 3 in the morning to ask about your inheritance?" I asked. "Because I need to know, and I figured you'd be more likely to tell me the truth if I caught me off guard, like I was his enemy, someone he needed to outmaneuver and deceive." "Michael, what happened to you?" I whispered. "What happened to my son?" "Your son grew up and realized that family loyalty is just manipulation wrapped in pretty words," he said. And I recognized Amber's phrasing, Amber's cynicism, Amber's poison coming out of my child's mouth. "Now, are you going to answer my question or not?" I closed my eyes and made a decision that would change everything. "The will is exactly the same as your father wrote it," I lied smoothly. "You're still the primary beneficiary of our estate." "Good," Michael said, and I could hear the relief in his voice. Not relief that our relationship could be repaired, not relief that he hadn't lost his family forever, but relief that his payday was still intact. "But Michael," I continued, my voice hardening, "if you think you can ignore your family for 5 years, skip your father's funeral, and then call in the middle of the night to make sure your inheritance is secure, you're about to learn exactly what family loyalty really means." I hung up the phone before he could respond. And then I sat in my empty house, in the bed I'd shared with Frank for 34 years, and I realized that the son I'd raised and loved and sacrificed for was already dead to me. The only question now was whether he deserved to know it. Let me take you back to the beginning to show you how I raised what I thought was a loving, responsible son who would honor the legacy his father and I spent our lives building. Because understanding who Michael used to be, or who I thought he was, makes his betrayal so much more devastating. Atlanta in the 1990s was a city of opportunity for people willing to work hard and dream big. Frank and I had moved there from small-town Tennessee in 1987, newlyweds with a used pickup truck, a toolbox, and a shared vision of building something meaningful together. Frank had learned construction working summers with his father's crew, while I had a business degree and the organizational skills to turn his craftsmanship into a profitable company. Our first office was literally our kitchen table in a rented duplex in Marietta. Frank would spend his days framing houses and installing drywall for other contractors, while I handled paperwork, permits, and the endless phone calls that come with starting a business. Evenings, we'd sit at that kitchen table planning our future, what kinds of projects we wanted to take on, how we'd treat our employees, what we'd build for the son or daughter we hoped to have someday. Riggs Construction officially incorporated in 1989, the same year I got pregnant with Michael. Frank liked to joke that we were building 2 legacies at the same time, our company and our family. Looking back, I think that's where we started making our first mistake. We didn't just want Michael to inherit a business. We wanted him to inherit our dreams. Michael was born on a snowy February morning in 1995 after 14 hours of labor that Frank endured right alongside me, holding my hand and whispering encouragements like he was coaching me through a particularly challenging construction project. When the doctor placed that tiny, perfect baby in my arms, Frank looked at both of us with tears streaming down his face and said, "This is what we built it all for." From the very beginning, Michael was the center of our universe in ways that probably weren't healthy for any of us. We'd tried so hard to have him, waited so long, that when he finally arrived, we couldn't help but see him as the culmination of everything we'd worked for. Frank would bring Michael to job sites, starting when he was just a toddler, strapping him into a little hard hat and letting him help by carrying plastic tools around the construction zone. Our crew loved having him there. He was this bright, curious little boy who asked a million questions and seemed genuinely interested in watching the buildings grow from foundation to completion. "That boy's got construction in his blood," Frank would say proudly, watching 3-year-old Michael stack blocks with the same concentration Frank brought to reading blueprints. I handled the business side of Michael's education, teaching him to count by having him help me organize receipts, showing him how to read profit and loss statements like bedtime stories. By the time he was 10, Michael could explain the difference between gross and net profit better than most adults. We thought we were raising him to understand the value of hard work and smart business decisions. What we were actually doing was teaching him to see everything, including family relationships, in terms of financial benefit. Our family life revolved around the business, but in ways that felt natural and positive. Sunday dinners at our house always included Frank's brother Eugene and his wife Jenny, along with their son Jake, who was 3 years younger than Michael. The cousins grew up like brothers, spending summers working on job sites, learning to operate equipment, competing to see who could drive a nail straighter or level a foundation more accurately. "The boys are going to run this company together someday," Eugene would say, watching Michael and Jake work side by side. Family business, next generation. Michael seemed to love the idea. Throughout high school, he'd bring friends to our job sites and introduce Frank as my dad, who built most of downtown Marietta. He'd talk about college like it was just a stepping stone to coming back and taking over Riggs Construction. He seemed proud of what we'd built, excited to be part of it. Frank and I were so proud of him. He was smart, charming, popular at school, polite to our clients, and respectful to our employees. He made good grades, played baseball, had a steady girlfriend named Rebecca, who came from a nice family. He seemed like everything we'd hoped for in a son. Looking back, I can see the warning signs I missed. Michael was charming, yes, but his charm was calculated. He knew exactly what to say to get what he wanted from different people. With Frank, he'd talk about building techniques and business expansion. With me, he'd discuss profit margins and client management. With his teachers, he'd be the respectful young man who always had his homework done. With his friends, he'd be the cool guy whose parents owned a successful company. He wasn't being genuine with any of us. He was being strategic. But I didn't see it that way at the time. I saw a son who was smart enough to communicate effectively with different people, mature enough to understand that different relationships required different approaches. I thought his adaptability was a strength that would serve him well in business and in life. The first real crack in my perception came during his senior year of high school, when he started pushing back against our expectations in subtle ways. "I might want to study business administration instead of construction management," he told us over dinner one evening. "That's smart," Frank had replied. "Good to understand the business side before you learn the practical side. We can teach you construction, but a solid business education will make you a better leader." But there was something in Michael's tone that bothered me. Not excitement about learning business skills to improve the family company, but something that sounded almost like resentment. "What if I don't want to come back to Riggs Construction right after college?" he asked. "What if I want to work somewhere else for a few years, get experience with other companies?" Frank and I exchanged glances. We'd always assumed Michael would come straight back to work with us, but his question wasn't unreasonable. Outside experience could make him a better leader when he eventually took over. "That could be valuable," I said carefully, "as long as you remember that this company will always be here for you. It's your legacy." "What if I don't want a legacy?" Michael asked quietly. "What if I just want to live my own life?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Frank looked hurt. I felt confused. And Michael looked trapped. "Son," Frank said gently, "this company isn't a burden we're forcing on you. It's a gift we've spent your whole life building for you." "But what if I don't want the gift?" Michael asked, and there was real frustration in his voice now. "What if I want to make my own way in the world instead of just inheriting everything you've done?" I should have heard the cry for independence in his words. I should have recognized that an 18-year-old might feel overwhelmed by the weight of expectations we'd placed on him. I should have reassured him that we loved him for who he was, not for what he might do with our company. Instead, I felt hurt and defensive. "Michael, we've given you opportunities most kids can only dream of," I said. "This company could make you a millionaire before you're 30. Why would you want to throw that away to struggle like everyone else?" "Maybe because I want to earn what I have instead of just inheriting it," he shot back. Frank, ever the peacemaker, tried to smooth things over. "Let's not make any big decisions tonight. Michael, you go to college, study whatever interests you, and we'll figure out the rest later. The company will always be here when you're ready for it." But damage had been done. Not to our relationship, at least not visibly, but to Michael's relationship with his own identity. He'd been trying to tell us he felt suffocated by our expectations, and we'd responded by reminding him how ungrateful he was for questioning them. Michael did go to college, University of Georgia, where he studied business administration with a minor in construction management. He seemed happy there, called home regularly, brought friends home for holidays. His grades were good, his social life seemed healthy, and his summer internships with our company went well. But something had changed in him during that conversation senior year. He was more distant, more calculating, more focused on what he could get out of relationships rather than what he could give to them. I didn't recognize it at the time because the change was subtle, and because he was still giving us what we wanted to see, the dutiful son who was preparing to take over the family business. It wasn't until his junior year of college that he met Amber Russo, and everything we'd built started to crumble. Amber was beautiful in that carefully curated way that comes from spending hours on makeup and outfit coordination. She was majoring in communications, which seemed to consist mainly of studying social media marketing and event planning. She came from a wealthy family in Buckhead, old Georgia money that looked down on new money families like ours who had actually worked for their success. Michael brought her home for Thanksgiving his junior year, and I knew immediately that she was trouble. Not because of how she looked or where she came from, but because of how she looked at our house, our furniture, our family photos, like she was cataloging everything and finding it insufficient. "Your family has done so well for themselves," she said to me while helping clear dishes after dinner, her tone suggesting that doing well for yourself was somehow less admirable than inheriting wealth. But Michael was clearly smitten with her, and Frank and I wanted to support his choices. We welcomed Amber into our family, included her in holiday celebrations, tried to show her the warmth and loyalty that defined the Riggs family. What we didn't realize was that she was studying us, learning our weaknesses, and teaching Michael to see us as obstacles to his real potential rather than the people who loved him most in the world. The change in Michael was gradual, but unmistakable. He started questioning family traditions, business decisions, and even Frank's leadership style. He'd make comments about modernizing the company, expanding our vision, and not being limited by small-town thinking. All of it sounded like Amber's influence, but Michael seemed to embrace it as his own enlightened perspective. By the time he graduated from college, Michael was no longer the son who'd grown up loving the family business. He was a young man who saw Riggs Construction as a stepping stone to something bigger and better, and who saw Frank and me as old-fashioned obstacles to his ambitious future. We just didn't know yet how far he was willing to go to remove those obstacles. The transformation of my son from someone I recognized into someone who felt like a stranger happened gradually, then all at once. Looking back, I can see that Amber Russo didn't just change Michael's perspective on our family. She systematically dismantled his loyalty and replaced it with a sense of entitlement that would eventually destroy everything Frank and I had built. Michael graduated from UGA in May 2017 and moved back home that summer to begin his full-time position at Riggs Construction. Frank had created a management training program specifically for him, 6 months rotating through different departments so he could understand every aspect of the business before settling into a leadership role. At first, everything seemed normal. Michael showed up on time, worked hard, and seemed genuinely interested in learning the operational side of the company. Our crew, many of whom had watched him grow up, welcomed him enthusiastically. His cousin Jake, now 22 and working as a project supervisor, was excited to have his big brother back on the team. But within a few weeks, I started noticing subtle changes in Michael's attitude and approach. "We need to modernize our client management system," he announced during a family dinner in June. "The software Dad's using is ancient. We're losing potential clients because our proposal process looks unprofessional compared to bigger firms." Frank looked up from his meatloaf, surprised. "What's wrong with our current system? We've never had complaints about our proposals." "That's because our current clients are used to dealing with smaller family-owned companies," Michael explained, his tone condescending in a way that made my stomach tighten. "If we want to compete for the big commercial contracts, the projects that could really grow this business, we need to look like a modern, sophisticated operation." There was nothing wrong with Michael's suggestion. Updating our software and proposal templates could indeed help us compete for larger projects. But there was something in his delivery that bothered me. The implication that Frank's way of doing things was somehow inadequate or embarrassing. "How much would this modernization cost?" I asked, falling into my familiar role as the financial voice of reason. "Probably 15,000 to 20,000 for the software and design work," Michael said casually, as if that was pocket change. "But it's an investment that would pay for itself with our first major commercial win." Frank considered this seriously. He'd always been open to improvements that would benefit the company, and he genuinely wanted Michael to feel like he could contribute to the business's growth. "Put together a detailed proposal," Frank said. "Show me exactly what you want to implement and how it would work. If the numbers make sense, we'll do it." Michael's smile should have been my first warning. It wasn't the grateful smile of a son whose father was supporting his ideas. It was the satisfied smile of someone whose manipulation had worked exactly as planned. The proposal Michael presented 2 weeks later was impressive and professional. Too professional for someone who'd been working in the business for less than a month. When I asked him about it, he mentioned that Amber had helped him with the presentation design and market research. "She's really good at this kind of thing," Michael said proudly. "Her communications degree focused on business marketing. She has great ideas about how we could expand our client base." That's when I realized Amber wasn't just dating my son. She was positioning herself as an unofficial consultant to our family business. A consultant whose only qualification was a degree in communications and whose family's old money had never required them to actually build something from scratch. Frank approved the software upgrade, and Michael threw himself into implementing it with an enthusiasm that should have pleased me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something larger and more concerning. My suspicions proved correct when Michael started bringing Amber to company events. First, it was the annual employee barbecue, where she spent the entire time talking about growth opportunities and market expansion, instead of getting to know the people who'd been part of our company family for years. Then it was client meetings, where she'd insert herself into conversations about projects she knew nothing about, offering opinions on design choices and budget considerations that made our actual clients visibly uncomfortable. "Michael," I pulled him aside after one particularly awkward client dinner, "Amber seems very involved in business decisions. Is there something I should know about her role here?" "She's just interested in what I do," Michael said defensively. "She has good insights about business strategy. You should listen to her ideas instead of dismissing them because she's my girlfriend." "I'm not dismissing her ideas because she's your girlfriend," I said carefully. I'm concerned because she's offering opinions about projects and clients without understanding our company culture or our long-term relationships. Michael's expression hardened in a way I'd never seen before. What you call company culture, other people might call resistance to change. Maybe the reason we're not growing faster is because we're too attached to doing things the way we've always done them. The criticism stung because there was a grain of truth in it. Frank and I were proud of our company's stability and reputation, but we'd been more focused on maintaining what we'd built than on aggressive expansion. Still, hearing that criticism from my son, criticism that clearly came from Amber, felt like a betrayal. Michael, this company has been successful for 30 years because we've built relationships based on trust and quality work, I said. Those aren't old-fashioned values, they're timeless business principles. Maybe, Michael said, his tone suggesting he disagreed. But they're also limiting principles if you want to build something bigger than a regional construction company. Bigger than a regional construction company. As if what Frank and I had built wasn't significant enough for Michael's ambitions. As if employing 47 people and completing millions of dollars in projects annually was somehow insufficient. The real problems started in the fall, when Michael began making decisions without consulting Frank or me. Small things at first, changing supplier relationships because he'd found better deals, restructuring project timelines without considering how those changes affected our crews, promising clients features or timelines that weren't realistic given our current capacity. When Frank tried to address these issues in their weekly father-son meetings, Michael would deflect by talking about innovation and efficiency. He'd present data and charts, again clearly prepared with Amber's help, showing how his changes would benefit the company in the long run. "Dad, I appreciate that you want to maintain control, but you hired me to bring fresh perspectives to the business," Michael said during one meeting I happened to overhear. "If you're going to second-guess every decision I make, why did you bring me on as management?" Frank, who'd spent Michael's entire life trying to build his confidence and prepare him for leadership, was caught between his parental instincts and his business judgment. He wanted to trust his son, wanted to believe that Michael's suggestions came from genuine desire to improve the company. But I was starting to see a pattern that worried me deeply. Michael wasn't trying to improve our existing business. He was trying to transform it into something completely different. Something that would impress Amber's wealthy family and social circle. The breaking point came in December, during our company's annual Christmas party. We'd always held it at a nice local restaurant, nothing fancy but comfortable and welcoming for our employees and their families. Michael suggested we upgrade to a high-end venue in Buckhead, complete with professional catering and live entertainment. "We need to show our team that we're a company on the rise," he argued. "If we want to attract top talent and keep our best people, we need to demonstrate that we're successful enough to invest in them." The party he planned cost 3 times our usual budget and felt nothing like the warm, family-oriented celebrations we'd always had. The venue was beautiful, but impersonal. The catering was impressive, but created a formal atmosphere that made our crew members uncomfortable. And the whole event felt like it was designed to impress outsiders rather than celebrate the people who'd made our success possible. I watched our longtime employees standing around in their best clothes, looking out of place and uncertain, while Michael and Amber held court with some clients from Amber's social network who had no real connection to our company. It was like watching my son perform in a play where he'd forgotten who his real audience was. "This is nice," Frank said to me during the party, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "Different from what we usually do." "It's very impressive," I agreed, though impressive wasn't the word I really wanted to use. After the party, our longtime foreman Bobby Jenkins pulled me aside. "Mrs. Riggs," he said quietly, "I don't want to speak out of turn, but some of the crew are wondering if maybe the company's heading in a direction that doesn't include people like us." His words hit me like a punch to the stomach. Bobby had been with us for 15 years. He was skilled, loyal, and respected by everyone on our team. If he was feeling uncertain about his place in the company, other people probably were too. "Bobby, you and the crew are the foundation of this company," I said firmly. "Nothing is going to change that." But even as I said it, I wondered if I was making a promise I couldn't keep. The final straw came in January, when I discovered that Michael had been meeting privately with some of our biggest clients, presenting proposals for expanded services that our company wasn't equipped to provide. He'd promised one client a complete design-build package for a major commercial development, despite the fact that we'd never handled projects of that scale and didn't have the personnel or equipment necessary to deliver what he'd promised. When I confronted him about it, his response revealed just how far he'd drifted from the values Frank and I had tried to instill in him. "Mom, you and Dad are thinking too small," he said, his tone a mixture of patience and condescension. "This client is offering us a $5 million contract. Yes, we'd have to expand quickly to handle it, but that's how businesses grow. You take calculated risks to reach the next level." "Michael, this isn't a calculated risk. This is gambling with our reputation and our employees' livelihoods. If we promise something we can't deliver, it won't just cost us this client. It'll destroy the trust we've spent 30 years building. Or it'll prove that we're ready to compete with the big players instead of staying comfortable as a small family business." The phrase "small family business" came out of his mouth like an insult. This from the young man who'd grown up proud of what his parents had built, who'd brought friends to job sites to show off our projects, who'd talked about carrying on the family legacy. "Michael, what's happened to you?" I asked, genuinely bewildered. "This company gave you everything you have. It paid for your education, your car, your apartment. It's the reason you have opportunities other young men your age can only dream of. Why are you suddenly acting like it's something to be ashamed of?" His answer, when it came, sounded like Amber's voice coming out of my son's mouth. "Maybe because I want to build something that's mine instead of just inheriting something that's yours. Maybe because I'm tired of being grateful for opportunities I never asked for. Maybe because I want to prove I'm capable of more than just maintaining what you and Dad created." That's when I understood that we'd lost him. Not to another woman, not to different career aspirations, but to a fundamental resentment about the very love and opportunities we'd given him. Michael wasn't trying to improve our company anymore. He was trying to prove that he was bigger than it, better than it, and entitled to transform it into something that would serve his ambitions rather than honor the principles that had made it successful. What I didn't know yet was that he'd already started taking steps to make that transformation happen, with or without our permission. And those steps would cost us everything. That phone call at 2:47 a.m. changed everything, but not in the way Michael intended. Instead of reassuring him about his inheritance, it opened my eyes to exactly who my son had become during those 5 years of silence. And more importantly, it made me realize I needed to know what he'd been doing with his life while I grieved his father alone. The morning after Michael's call, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour earlier, staring at my phone and trying to process what had happened. My son, the boy I'd raised, loved, and sacrificed for, had called me for the first time in 5 years, not to apologize or reconnect, but to secure his financial future. He'd known his father was dead for 3 years, and had never once reached out to offer comfort or share grief. But what bothered me most was how calculated the call had felt. Michael had called at 3 a.m. specifically to catch me off guard, hoping I'd be too disoriented to think clearly about my answers. He'd asked about the will before asking about my well-being. He'd treated me like a business contact, rather than his mother. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I was going to find out exactly what Michael Riggs had been doing for the past 5 years, and I was going to learn who he'd become in his new life. My first call was to my sister-in-law, Jenny, Eugene's wife, who'd been my closest confidant since Frank's death. Jenny was practical, level-headed, and had never particularly liked Amber, so I knew she'd give me honest advice without sugarcoating anything. "He called you at 3 a.m. to ask about inheritance?" Jenny's voice was sharp with disbelief. "Sally, that's not grief or desperation talking, that's calculation." "I know," I said, feeling exhausted just thinking about it. "Jenny, I need to know what he's been doing, where he's living, how he's supporting himself, whether he's married Amber. I need to understand who I'm dealing with." "You need a private investigator," Jenny said without hesitation. "Someone who can give you facts instead of speculation. If Michael's planning something, and that phone call suggests he might be, you need to know what you're up against." The idea of hiring someone to investigate my own son felt like crossing a line I'd never imagined approaching. But the alternative, continuing to live in uncertainty while Michael potentially plotted against me, felt worse. Jenny recommended a private investigator named Richards who'd helped her neighbor during a nasty divorce. "He's thorough, discreet, and honest about what he can and can't find out," she said. "Give him a call." I met with Richards 2 days later in his office in downtown Atlanta. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe late 30s, with the kind of calm, observant demeanor that probably served him well in his profession. When I explained the situation, he listened without judgment and asked practical questions that showed he understood both the emotional and legal implications of what I was requesting. "Mrs. Riggs, I want to be clear about what this investigation can and can't accomplish," Richard said. "I can find out where your son is living, how he's supporting himself, whether he's married, what his social media presence looks like, and whether he has any legal or financial troubles. What I can't do is tell you why he's made the choices he's made, or predict what he might do next." "I understand," I said. "Right now, I just need facts. I need to know who I'm dealing with." Richards quoted me a reasonable fee and estimated it would take about 2 weeks to compile a comprehensive report. "One more thing," he said as I was leaving. "Are you prepared for the possibility that what I find might be worse than what you're imagining?" I thought about that question during the drive home. Was I prepared? Could anyone really be prepared to learn that their child had become someone unrecognizable? "I have to be," I told him, "because not knowing is worse than knowing." While Richards conducted his investigation, I decided to do some research of my own. I started by calling our family lawyer, Tom Mitchell, who'd handled Frank's estate and had known our family for over 20 years. "Tom, I need to ask you something confidential," I said when I reached him at his office. "After Frank died, did anyone ever contact you asking questions about the will or my inheritance?" Tom was quiet for a moment. "Sally, you know I can't discuss other people's communications with my office, even if those people are family members." "I'm not asking you to violate attorney-client privilege," I said carefully. "I'm asking if anyone has been making inquiries about my estate or Frank's will without my knowledge." Another pause. "What's this about, Sally?" I explained about Michael's phone call, about his specific questions regarding changes to the will, about his apparent knowledge of Frank's death despite never contacting us. "I see," Tom said slowly. "Sally, I think you should come in for a meeting. There are some things we should discuss in person." We met the next afternoon in Tom's conference room, the same room where Frank and I had finalized our wills and estate planning documents. Being there brought back memories of Frank's careful questions about providing for Michael's future, his insistence that we structure everything to encourage responsibility while ensuring security. "About 6 months ago," Tom began, "I received a call from someone claiming to be Michael Riggs, asking about the status of Frank's estate. and whether there had been any changes to beneficiary designations. My stomach dropped. 6 months ago? So this wasn't spontaneous curiosity. He's been planning this inquiry for months. It gets more concerning, Tom continued. The caller claimed he was calling from out of state and couldn't come in person, but he wanted to verify information for family financial planning purposes. When I asked for identification and proof of relationship, he became evasive and eventually hung up. You think someone was impersonating Michael? No, Tom said grimly. I think it was Michael, but he was trying to get information without revealing that he was actively investigating your estate. When I insisted on proper identification and an in-person meeting, he realized he couldn't maintain the pretense. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Michael hadn't just been curious about his inheritance, he'd been actively researching it for months, trying to gather information without alerting me to his interest. Tom, is there any way he could challenge the will or force changes to the estate while I'm still alive? Not legally, no. As long as you're mentally competent, you have complete control over your assets and how you want to distribute them. But Sally, there are other ways to pressure someone into making estate changes. Financial manipulation, emotional blackmail, claims of abandonment or neglect. I've seen family members use all kinds of tactics to influence inheritance decisions. What should I do? Tom leaned forward, his expression serious. First, document everything. Keep records of all communications with Michael, including that phone call. Second, consider updating your estate planning documents to reflect your current wishes, whatever those might be. And third, be very careful about any future contact with Michael. If he's been planning this approach for months, he's probably prepared with strategies to manipulate your emotions or guilt you into making changes that benefit him. I left Tom's office feeling like I was seeing my situation clearly for the first time. Michael's phone call hadn't been a spontaneous moment of curiosity or even greed. It had been part of a calculated campaign to secure his inheritance while maintaining the fiction that our estrangement was my fault. 2 weeks later, Richards called to schedule a meeting to review his findings. Mrs. Riggs, I have the information you requested, but I'd prefer to go over it in person. Some of what I found is significant. We met at his office on a gray February afternoon that matched my mood. Richards had prepared a detailed report, complete with photographs, financial records, and social media screenshots. What he'd discovered was worse than I'd imagined. Your son is currently living in Nashville, Tennessee, Richards began, in a luxury apartment complex that costs approximately $3,500 per month. He's unemployed and has been for over 2 years. His rent and living expenses appear to be covered by someone else, likely his girlfriend, Amber Russo. He showed me photographs of Michael and Amber entering and leaving an upscale building, looking well-dressed and well-fed. They clearly weren't struggling financially despite Michael's lack of employment. Amber Russo is interesting, Richards continued. Her family is wealthy, as you mentioned, but she's been cut off from most of their money due to what appears to be ongoing family disputes. She's currently working as a social media influencer and event planner, but her income is irregular and probably insufficient to support their lifestyle. Then how are they paying for everything? Richards pulled out another set of documents. This is where it gets concerning. Michael has been receiving monthly payments of $1,800 from what appears to be a disability insurance claim. The claim is for a workplace injury allegedly sustained while working at Riggs Construction. I stared at the documents, feeling sick. Michael was never injured working for us. He worked for us for less than 2 years, and he was never hurt on the job. I figured as much, Richard said grimly. But apparently, he filed a workers' compensation claim about 6 months after your estrangement, claiming he'd suffered a back injury that left him unable to perform physical labor. The claim was processed without your knowledge, because he filed it as a former employee seeking delayed treatment for an injury he allegedly concealed while working. Is that legal? It's fraud, but it's sophisticated fraud that exploits gaps in the workers' compensation system. By the time you'd be notified of the claim, payments would already have started, and proving that the injury never occurred would require extensive legal proceedings. But that wasn't the worst of what Richards had found. The most devastating discovery was what Michael had been telling people about me and our family. "Mrs. Riggs, I need to prepare you for this next part," Richard said gently. "Your son has been claiming that you and your husband were abusive parents who controlled him financially and emotionally. He's told people that you cut him off when he tried to establish independence, and that you threatened to disinherit him if he didn't end his relationship with Amber." The room seemed to spin around me. None of that is true." "I know," Richard said softly. "But it gets worse. Michael has been telling people that you're in declining health, possibly suffering from dementia or other age-related mental health issues, and that you've been making irrational financial decisions that threaten his inheritance." "He's been telling people I have dementia?" "It appears to be part of a narrative he's constructed to justify both the estrangement and his eventual inheritance claim. If you were to change your will or make decisions he disagreed with, he could potentially argue that you weren't mentally competent when you made those changes." I sat in Richard's office, staring at photographs of my son living a life funded by lies about the parents who'd loved him, and I realized that the Michael I'd raised was truly gone. The man in those photographs wasn't just entitled or ungrateful. He was actively malicious. "There's one more thing," Richard said, hesitating. "Michael has been in contact with several attorneys over the past year, apparently seeking advice about contesting wills and claiming undue influence in estate planning." That's when I knew that Michael's phone call hadn't been about curiosity or even greed. It had been reconnaissance for a legal challenge he was already planning. My son wasn't just hoping to inherit from me when I died. He was laying the groundwork to take my assets while I was still alive, by claiming I was mentally incompetent, and he was my loving son trying to protect me from my own poor judgment. Sitting in that office, looking at evidence of Michael's betrayal spread across the conference table, I made a decision that would change both our lives forever. If Michael wanted to treat me like an adversary instead of his mother, then I was going to show him exactly what kind of adversary I could be. Armed with Richard's devastating report about Michael's lies, fraud, and legal machinations, I spent the next 3 weeks making decisions that would ensure my son learned exactly what consequences looked like. But first, I needed to understand the full scope of his betrayal and give him one final chance to choose honesty over deception. I decided to set a trap. Working with Tom, my family lawyer, I arranged for information to be accidentally leaked through mutual acquaintances that I was considering major changes to my estate planning. Nothing specific, just enough gossip to suggest that Michael's inheritance might be in jeopardy. If he was truly monitoring my financial situation as closely as Richard suspected, word would get back to him quickly. It took less than a week. "Mrs. Riggs, this is Daniel Crawford with Crawford & Associates," the caller said when my phone rang on a Tuesday morning. "I represent Michael Riggs in some legal matters, and he's asked me to reach out to you regarding some concerns about your recent decision-making." I felt my blood pressure spike, but I kept my voice calm. "What kind of concerns?" "Mr. Riggs is worried about your well-being, particularly some reports he's received about unusual financial decisions and possible cognitive decline. He's asked me to explore options for ensuring you receive appropriate care and guidance with major financial decisions." There it was, the opening move in Michael's legal strategy to have me declared incompetent. He was using a lawyer to make it sound official and caring, But what Crawford was really saying was that Michael wanted to challenge my mental capacity so he could control my assets. "Mr. Crawford," I said sweetly, "I appreciate Michael's concern, but I'm afraid there's been some misunderstanding. I'm in excellent health, both physically and mentally. Perhaps you could arrange for Michael to call me directly so we can clear up any confusion." "I'll certainly pass along your message," Crawford said, but his tone suggested he'd expected resistance. I hung up and immediately called Tom. "It's starting," I said. "Michael's lawyer just called about my cognitive decline and need for guidance with financial decisions." "That was faster than I expected," Tom said grimly. "Sally, if Michael is moving this quickly, he probably has more evidence of supposed incompetence than just rumors about estate planning changes. We need to be prepared for him to escalate this situation." Tom was right. 2 days later, I received a certified letter from Crawford and Associates requesting that I submit to a voluntary psychological evaluation to address family concerns about cognitive function and decision-making capacity. The letter was filled with legal language designed to sound official and intimidating, but what it really represented was Michael's attempt to create a paper trail supporting his claim that I was mentally unfit. That's when I decided it was time to reveal what I knew. Instead of responding to Crawford's letter, I called Michael directly. This time I was prepared for the conversation. "Michael, this is your mother," I said when he answered. "I understand you have some concerns about my mental health that you'd like to discuss." "Mom!" His voice was filled with fake surprise and manufactured warmth. "I'm so glad you called. Yes, I've been worried about you. Some people have mentioned that you've been making some unusual decisions lately, and I just want to make sure you're okay." "What kind of unusual decisions?" "Well, there are rumors that you're thinking about making major changes to Dad's estate plan, and some of your friends have mentioned that you seem confused or forgetful sometimes. I'm just concerned that maybe you're not getting the support you need." Every word was carefully chosen to sound caring while building a case for incompetence. But I could hear the calculation behind his concern, the manipulation disguised as love. "Michael, that's interesting," I said, "because I've been doing some research too, and I've learned some fascinating things about what you've been doing for the past 5 years. Silence on the other end of the line. "For example," I continued, "I learned that you've been collecting workers' compensation payments for a back injury that never happened. I learned that you've been telling people your father and I were abusive parents who controlled you financially. And I learned that you've been consulting with lawyers about contesting my will while simultaneously claiming to be concerned about my well-being. Mom, I don't know what you think you've discovered, but I also learned something really interesting about your living situation in Nashville," I interrupted. "That's a beautiful apartment complex you're living in, very expensive. I was curious about how an unemployed person could afford $3,500 a month in rent, but then I realized, you're not really unemployed, are you? Your full-time job is planning to steal my inheritance." The silence stretched longer this time. When Michael finally spoke, all pretense of concern had vanished from his voice. "What do you want?" he asked, his tone flat and cold. "I want you to understand exactly who you're dealing with," I said. "You think you're smarter than your old, possibly demented mother. You think you can manipulate me with fake concern while you build a legal case to take my assets. You think you can commit fraud against the company your father built and lie about the family that gave you everything, and there won't be consequences. I don't know what you're talking about. Michael, I have photographs of you and Amber. I have financial records showing the fraudulent workers' compensation claims. I have documentation of your meetings with lawyers about will contests. I have recordings of your lawyer calling me about cognitive concerns. I know about every lie you've told and every plan you've made." "You can't prove anything," he said, but I could hear the uncertainty creeping into his voice. "Can't I?" "Michael, Here's what's going to happen. You're going to withdraw your fraudulent workers' compensation claim immediately. You're going to stop telling people that your parents were abusive or that I have dementia. And you're going to stop plotting to have me declared mentally incompetent. And if I don't? If you don't, I'm going to have you arrested for workers' compensation fraud, which carries a potential sentence of up to 5 years in prison. I'm going to sue you for defamation for the lies you've been spreading about our family. And I'm going to make sure that every detail of your fraud and manipulation becomes public record. You wouldn't do that to your own son. Try me, I said, and I meant it. Michael, you stopped being my son the moment you decided to steal from the company your father built and lie about the family that loved you. You're a stranger who happens to share my last name, and I'll treat you exactly like I'd treat any other stranger who tried to defraud me. The call ended without another word from Michael. But I wasn't done. The next phase of my plan required showing Michael exactly how serious I was about consequences. Working with Tom, I prepared new estate planning documents that completely removed Michael from my will. Instead of inheriting millions, Michael would receive exactly $1, a legal gesture that would prevent him from claiming he'd been accidentally overlooked, while making it clear that his disinheritance was intentional and considered. The bulk of my estate would go to a charitable foundation I was establishing in Frank's name, focused on providing scholarships for young people from working-class families who wanted to learn construction trades. The irony was perfect. Instead of inheriting money because of his family name, Michael's inheritance would go to young people who were willing to work for their opportunities. I also set aside a substantial portion of the estate for Jake, Eugene's son, who'd remained loyal to the family and continued working in the business with integrity and dedication. Jake would inherit the family house and enough money to continue Frank's legacy in all the ways Michael had refused to do. But I wanted Michael to discover these changes in the most impactful way possible. I scheduled a meeting with Crawford, Michael's lawyer, ostensibly to discuss the voluntary psychological evaluation they'd requested. Tom and I met with Crawford in his downtown Atlanta office on a Friday afternoon in March. "Mrs. Riggs, thank you for agreeing to meet," Crawford said, clearly thinking he was about to secure a major victory for his client. "We're all just concerned about ensuring you have the support you need for important decisions." "That's very thoughtful," I said pleasantly. Before we discuss psychological evaluations, though, I wanted to share some recent decisions I've made that might affect Michael's concerns about my cognitive function. I handed Crawford copies of my new will and estate planning documents. "As you can see," I said while he read, "I've updated my estate plan to reflect my current priorities and values. I think this demonstrates quite clearly that my decision-making abilities are functioning perfectly well." Crawford's face went white as he read. "Mrs. Riggs, surely this isn't— Michael is your only son. Certainly you don't intend to disinherit him completely." "Mr. Crawford, my son has spent the past 5 years committing fraud, spreading lies about his family, and plotting to have me declared mentally incompetent so he could steal my assets. Those aren't the actions of someone who deserves an inheritance. Those are the actions of someone who's chosen to be an enemy of the family that raised him." "Mrs. Riggs, families have disagreements. Surely this seems like an extreme response to— Michael forged injury claims against my late husband's company," I interrupted. "He's been taking money fraudulently while telling people we were abusive parents. He's been meeting with lawyers about stealing my inheritance while I'm still alive. What part of that sounds like a family disagreement to you?" Crawford was scrambling now, clearly realizing that his client's plan had backfired spectacularly. "Perhaps there's been some misunderstanding. I'm sure if we all sat down together." "There's no misunderstanding," I said firmly. "And there won't be any sitting down together. Mr. Crawford, you can tell Michael that his inheritance is now exactly what he's earned through his behavior toward his family. Nothing." Tom and I left Crawford's office, and I felt lighter than I had in years. For the first time since Frank's death, I felt like I had control over my own life again. But the story wasn't quite finished. 3 hours later, my phone rang. It was Michael, and this time there was no pretense of concern or manipulation in his voice, just raw, desperate anger. "You can't do this," he said without preamble. "That money is mine. Dad always intended for me to inherit the business and the estate." "Your father intended for his son to inherit his legacy," I said calmly. "But you chose not to be his son anymore. You chose to be a criminal who steals from his family and lies about the people who loved him. I'll contest the will. I'll prove you're not mentally competent to make these decisions." "With what evidence?" I asked. "Michael, every conversation we've had in the past month has been recorded. Every document you've filed has been copies. Every lie you've told has been documented. If you try to contest this will, all of that evidence becomes public record. Everyone will know exactly what kind of person you really are." The silence that followed was the sound of Michael finally understanding that his years of planning and manipulation had not only failed, they'd cost him everything he'd been trying to secure. "You'll regret this," he said finally. "No," I said. "You'll regret this. For the rest of your life, you'll regret choosing greed over family, fraud over honesty, and manipulation over love. And every time you think about the millions of dollars you could have inherited if you'd just chosen to be a decent human being, you'll remember that you did this to yourself." I hung up the phone and looked around the house Frank and I had built together, the house I'd once hoped Michael would inherit and fill with his own family's laughter. Tomorrow I would start working on Frank's charitable foundation, ensuring that our legacy would help young people who understood the value of hard work and family loyalty. But tonight, I would simply enjoy the peace that comes with finally understanding what justice looks like. 6 months after that final phone call with Michael, I received an unexpected visitor. I was working in my garden on a Saturday morning in September, tending to the roses Frank had planted for our 20th anniversary, when a car pulled into my driveway. A young woman got out, someone I didn't recognize but who looked vaguely familiar. She was thin, nervous, and carrying what appeared to be a baby carrier. As she approached my front porch, I realized why she looked familiar. She had Michael's eyes and chin, but softer, kinder somehow. "Mrs. Riggs?" she said hesitantly. "I'm sorry to bother you. My name is Rebecca Chen. I used to date your son Michael in high school." Rebecca. I remembered her, the sweet, polite girl Michael had brought to family dinners during his senior year, before Amber had entered the picture and changed everything. "Rebecca," I said, wiping my hands on my gardening gloves. "What a surprise. Please come sit down. Can I get you some iced tea?" She accepted the tea but seemed nervous about something more than just visiting her ex-boyfriend's mother after so many years. "Mrs. Riggs, I need to tell you something, and I'm not sure how to begin," she said, settling the baby carrier beside her chair on the porch. "I have a daughter. Her name is Emma, and Michael is her father." I felt my world tilt slightly. A granddaughter. Michael had a child and had never told me. "Emma is 14 months old," Rebecca continued. "Michael doesn't know about her. When I found out I was pregnant, I tried to contact him, but—" She paused, looking uncomfortable. "He told me that his parents were dead, and he'd cut all ties to his past life. He said he couldn't be involved with anyone who might connect him to his abusive family." The familiar sting of Michael's lies hit me again, but this time it came with something else, heartbreak for this young woman who'd been abandoned with a baby, and for the granddaughter I'd never known existed. "Rebecca, I'm so sorry," I said. "Michael has been telling a lot of lies about his family. We weren't abusive. We loved him deeply, but he chose a different path. "I know," she said softly. "I never believed him about the abuse. I remember how kind you and Mr. Riggs were to me when we were dating. That's why I'm here." She reached into the baby carrier and lifted out the most beautiful little girl I'd ever seen. Emma had Michael's dark hair, but Rebecca's gentle expression, and when she looked at me with curious brown eyes, my heart broke and healed simultaneously. "I heard through mutual friends about what happened with Michael and your family," Rebecca continued. "I also heard that Mr. Riggs passed away, and I wanted to say how sorry I am. He was a good man." "Thank you," I said, unable to take my eyes off Emma, who was reaching toward the colorful flowers in the planter beside my chair. "Mrs. Riggs, I don't expect anything from you," Rebecca said quickly. "I'm not here asking for money or support. I have a good job as a nurse, and Emma and I are doing fine. But I thought you should know about her, and I thought maybe, if you wanted to, you might like to be part of her life." I looked at this brave young woman who'd raised my granddaughter alone for over a year, who'd been abandoned by my son, but had still found the generosity to reach out to his family, and I understood what real character looked like. "Rebecca," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "I would love nothing more than to be part of Emma's life. She's beautiful, and you've clearly done an amazing job raising her." We spent the next 3 hours on my porch, with Emma playing with toys Rebecca had brought while we talked about everything that had happened since high school. Rebecca told me about nursing school, about her pregnancy, about the challenges of single motherhood. I told her about Frank's death, about Michael's betrayal, about the legal battles and estate changes. "I can't believe he's been collecting money for a fake injury while his daughter's mother works double shifts to pay for daycare," Rebecca said when I explained about the workers' compensation fraud. "That's Michael's choice," I said, "but it doesn't have to affect Emma's future." By the time Rebecca left that day, we'd made plans for regular visits. Emma would grow up knowing her grandmother, even if her father had chosen to abandon both of us. Over the following months, Rebecca and Emma became the bright spots in my life that I hadn't realized I was missing. Emma took her first steps in my living room, said her first word, Nana, while playing in my garden, and brought a joy to my house that it had been missing since Frank's death. Rebecca proved to be not just a wonderful mother, but a thoughtful, intelligent young woman who shared many of the values Frank and I had tried to instill in Michael. She believed in hard work, family loyalty, and treating people with honesty and respect. "I sometimes wonder what happened to the Michael I used to know," she told me one afternoon while Emma napped in my guest room. "He was so different in high school, kind, ambitious in a good way, proud of his family. I never would have expected him to abandon his own child." "I wonder the same thing," I admitted. "But I've learned that sometimes people choose to become someone different from who they were raised to be. All we can do is focus on the people who choose to do the right thing." The legal aftermath of Michael's fraudulent schemes played out over several months. Richards, the private investigator, had provided evidence that led to criminal charges for workers' compensation fraud. Michael was arrested in Nashville in November and eventually pleaded guilty to avoid a longer prison sentence. He served 8 months in jail and was ordered to pay restitution. More importantly for our family's closure, the arrest and conviction created a public record of Michael's deception that effectively ended any possibility of him challenging my estate planning decisions. No court would consider competency claims from a convicted fraudster. Amber, interestingly, disappeared from Michael's life shortly after his arrest. Apparently, her support was contingent on his ability to provide a lifestyle she found acceptable, and a boyfriend in jail for fraud didn't meet her standards. Michael was released from prison in July, nearly 2 years after that middle-of-the-night phone call that had started everything. He made one attempt to contact me, sending a letter that was part apology and part continued manipulation. He claimed he'd learned his lesson and wanted to rebuild our relationship, but the letter also included subtle suggestions that his conviction had been unjust and that I bore some responsibility for his choices. I showed the letter to Tom, my lawyer, who confirmed what I already knew. This isn't genuine remorse, Sally. This is someone who's been coached on what to say to attempt reconciliation. Notice how he apologizes for mistakes, but doesn't take responsibility for deliberate criminal behavior. I didn't respond to the letter. Some bridges once burned shouldn't be rebuilt. Instead, I focused on the family that had chosen to love and support me. Eugene and Jenny became even closer after everything that happened, and their son Jake took on additional responsibilities in the construction business that he handled with the integrity Michael had never shown. My best friend Carol remained a constant source of support and perspective. "Sally," she told me one day, "you gave Michael every opportunity to choose love over greed, family over manipulation, honesty over fraud. He made his choices. You're not responsible for his decisions, but you are responsible for protecting yourself and the people who do value family." The charitable foundation I established in Frank's name became operational in the spring, providing scholarships for young people from working-class families who wanted to learn construction trades. The first recipients were 3 high school graduates who demonstrated both academic potential and strong character references, exactly the kind of young people Frank would have wanted to support. At the scholarship ceremony, I spoke about the values Frank and I had tried to instill in our own son: hard work, integrity, loyalty to family, and the understanding that opportunities are gifts that come with responsibilities. These scholarships aren't just about education, I told the recipients and their families. They're about investing in young people who understand that success isn't just about what you achieve for yourself, but about how you honor the people who believed in you and helped you along the way. Watching those young faces, eager and grateful and committed to making the most of their opportunities, I felt Frank's presence so strongly it took my breath away. This was the legacy he would have wanted, not money passed down to someone who felt entitled to it, but opportunities earned by people who would use them to build something meaningful. Emma's second birthday party was held in my backyard, with Rebecca's parents, Eugene and Jenny's family, and several of my closest friends in attendance. Watching Emma toddle around the yard, laughing and playing with her cousins, I realized that sometimes losing a child means gaining the space for other kinds of love to grow. "Do you think you'll ever tell Emma about her father?" Rebecca asked me privately during the party. "When she's old enough to understand, I'll tell her the truth," I said. "That he was someone we loved who made choices that hurt his family, but that his choices don't define her or limit her potential." "What if he tries to contact her when she's older?" I thought about that possibility and realized it didn't frighten me the way it might have a year earlier. "Then she'll be old enough to make her own decisions about what kind of relationship, if any, she wants with him," I said. "But she'll make those decisions knowing she's loved unconditionally by the family that chose to be present in her life." As the party wound down and Emma fell asleep in my arms, I reflected on everything I'd learned about loyalty, family, and the difference between love and manipulation. Michael had called that night 5 years ago, asking about the will because he'd fundamentally misunderstood what inheritance really means. He thought it was about money, about what he deserved because of his last name, about what he could take from the family that had raised him. But real inheritance isn't about money. It's about values, character, and the kind of person you choose to become. It's about honoring the people who believed in you by becoming someone worthy of their faith. Emma would inherit something far more valuable than money. She would inherit a family that understood the difference between love and manipulation, between loyalty and exploitation, between genuine care and calculated self-interest. she would inherit the knowledge that real family loyalty means showing up not just when it's convenient or profitable, but especially when it's difficult. And if Michael ever tried to re-enter her life, she would already understand that love isn't about what someone can give you. It's about what they choose to give up for you, what they sacrifice to support you, and how they treat you when they have nothing to gain from the relationship. That night, after everyone had gone home and Emma was sleeping peacefully in the crib I'd set up in my guest room, I sat on my back porch and looked up at the stars Frank and I used to watch together. "I think you'd be proud of how this turned out," I whispered into the warm Georgia night. "Not the way we planned, but maybe the way it was supposed to be." The lesson Michael had taught me, without meaning to, was simple but profound. Real family loyalty isn't about blood or obligation or inheritance. It's about choosing every day to be present for the people who matter to you. Michael had chosen greed over family, fraud over honesty, manipulation over love. Those choices had cost him everything, not just money, but the opportunity to know his own daughter, to be part of a family that would have supported him through anything, to carry on a legacy built by people who'd loved him unconditionally. But his choices had also revealed who the real family was. Rebecca, who'd raised Emma with love and courage. Eugene and Jenny, who'd stood by me through everything. Jake, who'd honored Frank's memory through his own integrity. And all the friends and extended family who'd chosen loyalty over convenience. In the end, Michael had been right about one thing during that late-night phone call. The will hadn't changed, but everything else had. And for the first time since Frank's death, that felt exactly right.